Mikkel, nice to be back in Denmark, back in the studio here. After, I gotta say, we had it all planned out. Everything was perfect. I brought a super sophisticated weirdo microphone that you and Bart bought, and everything was there, and we were ready to go. But then I checked the Wi-Fi just a couple of days earlier, and I was like, this is not gonna go well. This is not going to work.
Yeah,
it's like, let's forget about it.
I saw your Slack message Sunday. Yeah, it's not gonna happen. I can't even watch Netflix.
Yeah.
And I told Ulf, I was like, Netflix? What is? He's on holiday.
Yeah. So I was really happy that Olaf could jump in.
Yeah, he wasn't. No, he was.
He was kind of semi. He had like a. His comment was, "I did not perform."
Yeah, Pip. We should put him on a podcast. Pip.
Exactly.
No, it was fun.
But happy we could keep it up. Happy we didn't miss the streak here of missing a week and stuff, because that's not what we do.
No,
we're professionals. And worked out. So wonderful.
Yeah.
But also wonderful to start talking to you again.
Yeah. I mean, we only recorded once when I was back from my long break, paternity. And so I was like, oh, you're already leaving. You don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
No, but it's good. While you were kind of busy, I don't know what you were doing on your holiday. I'm imagining relaxing / working / kids.
Yeah.
I was busy reading a bunch of stuff, which we're going to get into
today.
today.
That's a change.
Yeah. Yeah, I never read. No. I was reading S1s.
What is an S1, Mikkel?
And an S1 is basically a document that a company creates when they want to go public. Mm-hmm. So they have to disclose a lot of information. And basically what we're going to do today is expose a bunch of the things I've learned through reading through this stuff in terms of how they grow their business, why they're operating, as hypergrowth companies. What is it they've done?
Yes. And to be straight, right? Everyone can access those S1s. They're public information. They're basically being created when you want to go public in the US. So kind of if you want to file for an IPO, initial public offering in the US, you need to provide an S1 document where you have tons of information about your business. And it provides you with an opportunity to also spin that information. It doesn't just give like your annual statements and then boring stuff like that. It also allows you to show metrics that are not financially audited in that sense. You can define those metrics in there even. Kind of you can do some trickery in this. But you can also spin a story around it.
Yeah.
And it's basically a very data-driven pitch. Usually it's written in a very boring way, right?
Well, it's kind of a sales pitch, actually. So a very long sales pitch.
To be honest, I totally know what an S1 is. I've never read one, though. So that's why I was like, tell us more.
Give me the cliff notes.
Yes. So if any of the ones listening are interested in S1s, you can. How did you find the S1
Google.
for?
Google.
So you just say S-1 and then company name?
Yeah. I literally did S1 Snowflake, S1 Datadog. And you'll get it as the first result from the SEC.gov.
Yeah,
I think it is.
Yeah,
and it's a public document available to anyone.
And SEC is the Stock Exchange Commission.
Exactly.
I think, right?
Exactly. So
wonderful.
I think last point to make on the S1 is those go through rigorous auditing. So it's not, you can't really, trick your way around it.
No,
it's pretty legit.
Yes, and then kind of the alternative to an S1 are the quarterly earning calls. Where you can basically listen to the CEO of that company.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do that for Microsoft. You can do it for Google. You can do it for any company that's public in the US that has to do quarterly earning calls. You can literally listen to the sound file. I'm not sure if people know that actually. It's also pretty boring because it's all super scripted. Yeah. And then it's I've listened to some of those actually. And it's a really, I mean, it is a phone call kind of setup. It's not as and you basically hear analysts then go online and ask one question and then anyway, so there's a bunch of different cool ways of how you can actually figure out what's going on with some of those awesome companies. I think very few go through this lengthy process of actually listening to it.
Yeah.
But you did. So let's dig into it.
I focus specifically on hypergrowth companies and the top performers. And just to give you a taste of what it looks like, they have a 124% net dollar retention rate. So actually north of that on average. they have 73% ARR growth year over year. And pretty much I found they do the rule of 80, not the rule of 40, which is crazy. So they are growing at a very, very rapid pace.
So 124 net dollar retention means you have $1 in revenue this year. And by the end of the year, you have $1.24 in revenue without quote unquote doing anything about it, right? So this is the net dollar retention piece. You didn't need to acquire those. You kind of get it from your existing customer base. And then the rule of 40 and rule of 80, I don't want to go into details with this right now, but it basically, meshes together how profitable you are as a business and how much you're growing as a business. Those two things are basically baked together. And it basically means if you're burning a lot or if you're very unprofitable, that's okay as long as you're growing a lot. If you don't grow a lot anymore, you need to be way more profitable for this to make sense, right? And the standard is like 40%. So you basically, you don't burn any money. So you're basically at zero. Then you still should be growing 40%. That's how this works. But these guys, you're saying, in the rule of 80, they're close to basically not burning anything. They're almost profitable and are still growing like 73, 75%, right?
It's absolutely bonkers. So, disclaimer. This is not investment advice. This
what
is
did you
advice
study
for
again? What's your master line called again?
Innovation and business development.
Yeah. So it's not finance anything.
No, exactly.
So Mikkel does know anything.
I don't know anything about that stuff. But I basically try to distill between those companies like Datadog, Asana, Toast, Snowflake, Freshworks, all those really hypergrowth companies. What are some core takeaways? Anyone who is a revenue operator, a revenue leader can take away and learn. It's not going to be something you can just plug and play. It doesn't obviously work like that. But there are some really important takeaways that we're going to get into now.
Let's go.
The first thing I noticed, and this was across all of them, there were not one case where this was not happening. It was very clear that the business was structured to generate negative churn. Which is just... And I remember us having had conversations back in the day at Falcon around, should we focus on churn? Should we try to, reduce the churn we have? But if I always felt like it was such a big mountain to climb. And then seeing these companies that have negative churn, you're just like, why can we do that? And it's because they structured their business to achieve it. And
obviously, why is this so interesting? Again, right? So you want to grow 75% year over year, which is basically their case. But 25 percent points out of the 75, you don't need to acquire new. You don't need to have a sales team and a marketing team and dollars to kind of get all of that stuff. You get it from your customer base. Sure, there's still work you need to deploy in order to extract that. So don't get me wrong, it doesn't come for free in that sense. But basically, the 50% growth that you need to do on top now is much... it's much smaller.
It's
right?
easier.
No, but take this in comparison to someone that maybe has net dollar retention of 90%. Right? Suddenly, instead of growing 75% by only 50% new biz, you would now need to do 85% growth in new biz in order to get to the same number, and that's like a much more expensive to achieve.
So that was a huge takeaway. And I think the other one I noticed with the setup is then when you have negative churn, you can really focus on just landing accounts because they're also going to expand, which was really, really cool to see actually that they've been very intentional. And this is very much the pricing and packaging. So when you think about even Asana as a case, they have a freemium model. And I get that's pretty unique, right? But they've clearly structured their pricing and packaging in a way that would expand accounts.
And I think so this topic also very much coincided actually with some of the net retention hacking that you and Olaf were actually talked about, right? And I think on the pricing and packaging, there really was this find a easy way in, like low ACV and then build it out. That could either be based on start with 3 users and then build from there. Or it could be start with an easy use case for one department, then expand into other departments, right? And that's kind of both baked into pricing and packaging, and then obviously results in some of that awesome net dollar retention.
And I mean, they also have a strict focus, on how can we expand our customers. So they have built out motions to effectively do that, right? So they will look at can these customers adopt more of the same product, or can a different department at the same customer buy, either the same product, but or even another product in some cases, which is just pretty cool as well, right? So it enables different motions all of a sudden that at least for me, I've not experienced myself in this way.
And so I didn't read these as once, and I'm not sure if there's sometimes in there, but so have you noticed whether or not they're using M&A, so mergers and acquisitions, buying companies in order to leapfrog some of those features and or products that they want to add on to their existing customer base?
I mean, it hasn't been explicit that they wanted to or have made M&A in order to have another use case they could go and sell, but it's very clearly been stipulated in pretty much every single S1 that they wanted to use some of that cash for mergers and acquisition. And I'm pretty sure when you've built your business model in this way, you will look for complementary product to unlock these things.
So one anecdotal story on the side. So ServiceNow, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with them. They are massive. Yeah. I think they're at $1 billion in ARR or something like that. They're they have a gross retention rate of 99%. Think about that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So the reason I know is because I've been close to some of that before. But when they acquire a company, they obviously kind of do it with the intent to sell it into their customer set, right? You know what they do? So they buy this company, might be 10 million, 20 million, whatever in revenue. They pay whatever money for it. And then they literally churn all of those customers with the acquisition. They don't want to have any of the baggage of this 20 million. Who cares? They don't want any of that baggage. They want to have the product, the technology. They're probably going to tweak it a little bit, integrate it with their own thing. And then they basically take that technology and sell it into their existing customer base. They only do this whole thing for upsell purposes. Yeah. They don't do it for the 20 million or so that they acquired in the process. It's pretty insane. I think you need to be big enough to to be able to afford something like this. But this is kind of what they're sometimes doing.
But I think it's also just cool. Like if you go and read now some of these S1s, they're going to be 3 years old. And obviously things has happened after. So you can go and look what acquisitions have they made, what products have they developed. And I think it's very clear, again, back to the whole point here being they've structured their business to do this. There's a lot of thought and intent behind it, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think that is, breaking it down to the 5 to 50 million ARR listeners that we might have here. I think what this tells me again, and Mikkel and I actually recorded a podcast episode on this topic, but we never published it because we weren't happy about it. It's
strict
that
quality control.
Yes, it's that net retention rate and churn. A lot of people, especially on LinkedIn, trying to make this a marketing, sales, and CS problem, and it's like, first of all, it's not a CS problem. That's a boo boo. You're not allowed to say this anymore. It's a sales problem. It's a marketing problem, and so forth. I think what it really is a strategy problem.
Yeah.
And I think the way that these companies are attacking this is a very clear, clean-cut example that this is a strategy problem you need to tackle, right? So really, when you think about it, you will have, if you're selling into specific segments or departments, you will get that industry inherent churn just out of that, right? So for example, if you're selling to SMB companies, you will have a higher churn, period, right? This is why, by the way, Toast, they're selling to small restaurants and so forth. It's absolutely crazy that they have those net retention numbers. And, for example, if you're selling to teams like marketing, marketing is, they buy a lot, but they churn a lot as well, right? Or if you sell to agencies, or if you sell to, I don't know if, another good example, but basically you get this inherent industry churn out of these things. And the way to react is to be extremely strategic about it, right? Yeah. So in the SMB case, you need to be super smart about pricing and packaging. Kind of how can you get people in and then, have triggers and, upsell them over time. I think that what Toast is really good at. But then you have someone like Asana, who basically started out the journey also in the SMB. It was a project management tool for SMB, right? In the very beginning, right? I think if I remember correctly, the predominant amount of business for Asana, still freemium, but it's enterprise. They have like a big, Asana is basically an enterprise product and company today, right? That came from somewhere completely different. And obviously, if you make that strategic shift, your net retention, your gross retention numbers will go with it, right? And that's why, again, right, it's, tackling this net retention rate, I think tweaking it to go from 80 to 85, gross retention rate, or go from 95 to 100, optimizing that stuff, I think you can achieve that by marketing, sales, and CS excellence, like together. Don't get me wrong. But I think doing like, changes that are 25, 30% points, I don't think you will get this by just more aligned sales, marketing, and CS,
And the way I've heard it in the past, maybe just the last point on this is we need to make the product more sticky, right? So sure, maybe Datadog and Snowflake, they are more sticky inherently once you really plugged it in. Asana is not. It's not as sticky, right? And I think it's just, again, you can focus on trying to make the product more sticky, or you can try and make it more expandable.
Yeah, I mean, there are thousands kind of different ways about it. I would argue that if Asana has rolled out to more than 50 or 100 employees in your organization, I think it's pretty sticky. Obviously, Snowflake, you build everything on top of that thing. So, have fun ripping that out. And Datadog is really a data observability, right? So I think, I recently was on their website actually, and went to their pricing and packaging page. Complete gibberish to me, by the way. But I think they have 30 different products.
Yeah, they have a lot. It's crazy.
So if you think about it, yes, you buy one product, and then, it's kind of there. Let me add the other ones, And now you're 5 products deep. It's like, okay, I would need to replace this now by installing 3 or 4 different competitors to kind of get the same thing. You have that stickiness there.
Okay, so that was number 1. When I saw that connection, I was like, oh, this is pretty good. Yeah. So number 2 was actually also quite interesting. What I noticed was they all had multiple sources of revenue. And I'm not just in this case, I don't just mean, they have from Germany and they have from US and they have very different segments that they acquire revenue from. They have very different motions that they use to acquire revenue. So it's not just very one-dimensional. We have this one product for this one segment. They've really built out their business to be able to attack in multiple places, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And so I think I'm not sure if you want to.
No, go.
Continue. I think what this means for me, right? So first of all, multi-segment, multi-product, multi-geo, multi-motion.
Yeah.
I mean, there might be another dimension we're missing here potentially. But what that basically means is every company starts as a single product company.
Yeah.
And then when you, this is what you have when you do product market fit. You're high-fiving, well, we have one product that fits the market. Great. Then you go through the next stage of, okay, how do we bring it to market? And usually you will, if you achieve it, usually we'll have one channel, one motion that kind of works to one segment and so forth, right? And what these companies have done is to add to this, build out this matrix.
Yeah.
They did almost, you basically have a matrix of segments, so SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. You have a matrix of, channels you attack them by, let's just say PLG, inbound, outbound, whatever. And then, now it's a cube. Then you have, what am I missing? Different product lines.
Yeah.
You have your different product lines and so forth, right? And then, okay, each combination is one thing that we would call product market fit when we would be high-fiving about this, right? So what this means is 2 things. Number 1, none of these things, you don't deploy them and suddenly it's 100 million business again by itself. All of these things are S-curves, right? You start out, you attack a new combination of product, segment, and channel, if you will. And you need to figure out how does it work. And obviously you can piggyback on some of the existing infrastructure you have. Obviously you have learned some things already. Obviously you have a brand that helps you. And there are a couple of other things that make it easier than to have like a cold start product market fit problem all the time. But it still also means that you need to invest and you won't receive the revenues from it immediately, right? Kind of, this is the shitty part of the S curve.
Yeah.
But as you layer all of these things on top, you basically kind of then get that acceleration going, right? And I think the opposite of that. So, okay, cool. Isn't everyone doing this? Well, the problem is that a lot of people either think that the one S curve that they have mastered is, the neck is a little bit longer than they thought it would be of the S. But it's sometimes it's just not true, right? And then kind of you start tapering off, right? So what do you do then? And obviously you can then add another channel and you can, all of that stuff. But basically you really need to do all of these things again and again and again and very consistently, right? Yeah. And what I think is extremely stunning is how good those companies got at that stuff, right? When you think about it, figuring out a version of product market fit, go-to-market fit at an organization that is 100 million ARR for a tiny shitty product that sits somewhere in the corner, and then actually get it to be its own 50 million, 100 million revenue line, it's pretty fucking insane, right? And again, kind of HubSpot recently saw a breakdown of their revenues. And sure, the marketing automation piece of HubSpot is still like 800 million in ARR or something like this. The sales piece now is at 400.
Yeah.
This was, everyone was laughing at the CRM thing a couple of years ago. And basically, it was tagged on for free to your marketing automation thing, right? And then their CS piece is now at 100 million. And then they have this ops piece they don't disclose because it's probably at like 5 million or something kind of, not good enough for the plus 1 billion in revenue that HubSpot has. But that's how you do it. That's kind of how you add things on top. And that's, the HubSpot wouldn't have been able to cross the 1 billion line. Think about it like this. HubSpot wouldn't have been able to cross the 1 billion revenue line just with their, market-leading marketing automation solution. It wouldn't have done that, right? It needed to have the sales piece, it needed the CSPs. And, guess what? Their churn probably plummeted whenever they were able to install the sales piece and the CSPs, and suddenly they got more sticky, harder to rip and replace, and so forth, right? So these things then, work really nicely together.
Yeah. No, I think it's super interesting. And I also heard, I think it was Jason Lemkin from SaaSta talk about, Zoom, they got the COVID boost, basically. Yeah. And then what happened after that was not a lot of growth comparatively, right? And why is that? And his point was, well, they got propelled so much forward that they didn't have enough product, ready to actually, have another S curve start to pick up, which is, so I think I agree. It's having a platform play is what it ultimately becomes. And, having a plan for building out these additional sources of revenue, not just how can I get more of the same customer, but how can I get the customer right over there? Or maybe it's another department making it that leap easier.
And it's actually funny that you mentioned Zoom. So when Zoom started, I don't know when it was, like 6 or 7 years ago, I'm not sure, or 10, I don't know. Basically it was ZOOM, right? And that was the logo. If you now look up the logo, and it's not everywhere, I think you need to kind of start the product actually. It's now Zoom with like 5 or 6 or 7 different O's. And each O has its own product icon in there. And basically kind of, it's not just video conferencing anymore. No. It's like 20 other pieces or 6, 7 other pieces here that they basically kind of build out in order for you to kind of use it.
Yeah. So multiple sources of revenue, also pretty good one. So the last takeaway I wanted to share in Surface is they all had a plan for what's next. Of course, it's given when you do an S1 and you want to potentially get investment, you need to talk about what are you going to do with that money. So that was obviously very clear what a lot of them was going to do. And there were some interesting findings. So Datadog, their penetration outside US was tiny. It was very clear they'd been strictly focused on US. I mean, sure, they've probably focused on other markets, but not to the sheer degree that they had with US. So huge opportunity for them to do something. And I'll bet you they had a plan back then for how were they going to deploy that cash, where were they going to go, what were the requirements if we go into, let's say, DACH, what does that mean for our business, any kind of regulatory kind of things, right? So all of them, they had a plan for what was going to be next, essentially.
Yeah. And I think, so I mean, you mentioned it already, and I think that's at the core of this one is that, hey, this is a pitch deck, just written really shitty. And obviously the pitch deck needs to include where's growth gonna come from next, right? What is the awesome next opportunity? I think if you have C-level folks listening, I think this is an important pitch, obviously, for your next funding investment, funding round and so forth. Kind of what not only what I'm going to use the money for, but on a strategic high level, where do you think revenue is going to come from? Right. And if you then think about, okay, how does that then land on the operational layer? Well, there's a lot of, breaking down that needs to happen to figure out how to then actually, achieve that in the end. And I think you and I talked about this a couple of times in like the top-down, bottom-up matching. I forgot the episode. Maybe kind of,
we'll cut it in or something.
We'll cut it in or something. I think what I think is cool operationally here is they already then started, to a degree, to say like, hey, we will need to add another S-curve here pretty soon.
Yeah.
That means we are looking forward to the nice inflection point of the S to see the growth coming out. But we also know it's going to take some time to actually get there. We also know that the investments that we're going to pour into this, we won't see the return of that immediately. It's going to take some time to get to that point. And basically kind of have a clear understanding of the delay that comes out of the cash that's being expanded in order to achieve it, with a clear hypothesis on how that's going to, come back and drive growth eventually, right? Yeah. I also would say that since all of those companies went public a couple of years ago, you don't have this, at least in these S1s, you don't have this strong pitch on efficiency and profitability potentially in there. I'm not quite sure.
That's shifted after.
Yeah. Sure. So it's very much top line focused, right? So that's why also the story here usually then ends up being very top line oriented, right? I think if there's one thing that's that I think is, for those folks is a little bit more second nature. For teams that are smaller and earlier, is a bit forgotten, and I mentioned it earlier already a little bit, is really kind of to think about strategic M&A here. And had a cool chat with someone recently that I think they had like 20 or 30 million, and he has kind of investment banking background, so he was very, of course M&A, right? That was like not a question, he was very, very pro, and I was like, hey, the M&A that I've been doing, and that I was sometimes the acquirer and the acquiree at the same time. The acquired, something like that. It's pretty risky. I mean, you have like a 50-50 of this thing working out, and we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes that change hands. And, would you really recommend that to early stage teams, right? Even if they had the equity and the cash to buy that stuff. And he was actually saying, well, sure, you can do those big bet moves and stuff. The way they have executed and operated and thought about it was, hey, we're really strong in the Nordics, we're really strong in Germany. There's let's just say, quote unquote, competitor in France.
Yeah.
They're kind of doing the same thing, kind of a similar product, but they have a full sales operation set up in France.
Yeah.
And they're 20 people.
Yeah.
M&A is a big word for acquiring something with 20 people. But, at the end of the day, he was basically, and I think operationally that makes total sense. He was basically balancing out, okay, do I want to buy this thing for probably, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 million euros, half cash, half equity or something? Or do I kind of want to burn the same amount of money with much more risk, trying to
trying to figure it out.
You know what? Try and even just open a bank account in France.
Yeah.
Try and do that.
Yeah.
And then you have the office, you have the hiring, you have the go-to-market fit. You need to kind of, try and have your Danish sales leader listening to those French calls. And help them.
Yeah,
it's not gonna happen. So basically, if he was then saying like, hey, let's we can use that money to just operationally buy another unit.
Yeah,
basically. Yeah, and then merge it in. There's still issues. We talked about, the cultural issues around it, and how do you think about if you as a company can even ingest that team. And he was like, well, it's super crucial and critical, and they kind of scan for this and yada yada. But ultimately, what kind of made super sense for me is like, yeah, we're also only looking for like teams that maybe 10-15% of our FTE count.
Yeah.
So it's like a very clear ingestion instead of like a merger of equals or something like that, right? So kind of that de-risk this a lot.
And I think this is where it gets a little bit clearer, because it's so obvious to say, oh, they have a plan for what's next. And when I say that, it's obviously, where's the next dollar gonna come from? And this is the whole conversation, right? So I think acquiring this company in France, you gain time. You gain access to so many things that propels you forward faster. And it doesn't have to be acquisitions. It can obviously be other segments. It can be other use cases and so forth, right? But they all had a very clear, hey, this is where the opportunity is. It's enterprise, or it's international, or it's a use case. And I think it's just so clear to see that someone has clearly put thought into what are the moves we're going to make that's going to drive the revenue.
No, absolutely. And I think to tie it back to some of the S1s, I would argue that these teams probably have put a lot of more thought into it than most of the folks listening potentially, right? And I think that's really the takeaway is, are you as a, and you know what, granted, this is not a director of revenue operations, maybe, thought track, but have you thought as a CRO, have you thought as a CEO founder, are you thinking enough about what's next? Where's the next leg of where's the next growth curve going to come from? I think this is where we can see where those companies have been doing an excellent job.
Ooh, some pretty cool stuff in here. I mean, you should try and Google some of these S1s yourself and try and read them.
Yes.
You can skip a lot of the financial stuff. There's so much information in there, but you can pretty easily find a lot of information in there that's going to be interesting to you. And I think especially now that these IPOs have happened, a few years back, you can see how did it actually unfold for some of these businesses, which is cool. It's all there. It's all available.
Yes. It just takes some time, right? And that's usually what the problem is. I think just to recap, right? You checked out the S1s from Datadog, Asana, Toast, and Snowflake. And you really found three main things that are common across those four crazy, awesome, successful companies. One is their business is structured to generate negative churn. Right? We talked about this being a strategic problem, not only marketing, sales, and CS alignment problem. They, number two, they have multiple sources of revenue and are able to add more sources. And sources in this case is different products, different segments, different motions, right? And then the last thing really is around that they have a clear idea, and it's a strategic piece actually, a clear strategic but then tangible piece of, what is gonna come next, right? How can we prepare the next S curve? Where's the biggest opportunity? And then they have proven that they can execute on those S curves really well. So kind of really having a good approach to this.
Totally. So good to have you back in the studio, my friend.
Of course. I mean, it's just what it is.
You're blushing a bit.
No, that's the pink sign next to it.
Yeah, true. Oh, they can't see it. You can watch it on YouTube, then you get the reference, then you get it.
Wonderful.
I think I'm going to take a pause from reading S1s now and do something more productive. But I hope this was interesting, insightful, and helpful.
Wonderful. I think it was. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thanks for spending the time. And thank you, Mikkel.
Thank you, Tony. Bye.
Bye.